Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Homeschool Minnesota. My name is Dale Annan. I'm so glad you guys are here with us today. I'm excited because today I get to bring somebody to you who has a lot of experience and has written several books. His latest book, Students in the Lion's Den, let me show it to you right here. Students in the Lion's Den is all about our kids and how do we get them from our home into college or into careers, into the world with a solid biblical view of who God is, who they are, and how it relates to the world that they're living in. So today I want to welcome Dr. Gary Lovejoy to talk about his book, all about the challenge of sending our kids into universities and colleges only to have them walk away from their faith during their time there. Dr. Lovejoy was a counselor for over 40 years, specializing in marriage and counseling and treatment of depression and anxiety. He has written several books on those topics, which I will post in a link below, as I always do. You will get a link to everything Dr. Lovejoy has, because I don't want you to miss out on anything. So I just want to welcome Dr. Lovejoy. Welcome, Dr. Lovejoy.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. Now, those of you who listen know that we have talked a lot about getting our kids from home into the world and having them have a real solid worldview. What does that look like? A faith that is theirs, a personal relationship with God that they can stand firm in. And so if you're thinking, oh, Dale, you've drowned on about this a lot, that's because God keeps bringing it up. So if God keeps bringing it up, there's more that you need to know. So one
Right.
of the things that Dr. Lovejoy that you say in your book is there is nothing more avoidable than naive Christian students marching off to their spiritual demise simply because they were unprepared to handle the tests of their faith. That is a powerful quote. Can you talk about why you wrote that and why you believe that?
Well, partly because so many students, when they head off to college, and I taught for over 30 years in the college level as well as my counseling practice, and one of the things that often I found was that students would come to me, sometimes come into my office. They knew I was a Christian, and they came into my office. Some of them crying, some of them angry, that they had just been dissected in their philosophy class. We had a professor on campus who was a very active atheist who had a perverse delight in tearing apart a Christian's point of view. And if he had a Christian in his classes, he would dissect them right there in class and humiliate them, actually.
Wow.
And so they would come in and they would be either they were in tears because they felt like I didn't have an answer for what they were saying, for what he was saying. He's got his PhD. How can I compete with that? And secondly, there's beginning to question their own faith. Like, well,
Mhm.
maybe what I believe is not correct, and maybe what he's got the real answers. And the ones who were angry were feeling humiliated in front of their peers, and many times they too were asking, "Am I defending the indefensible?" So consequently, I began to realize that they were like sheep to the slaughter. They had no preparation, no way to come back. And they shared with me some of the arguments that were given in class where it left them speechless. And most of the arguments were highly refutable, but they didn't know that because they were unprepared.
Yeah.
And many of them do not know scripture well enough. They don't. They're unable to really give a reason for what they believe, as we are admonished to do in the book of Hebrews.
Mhm.
And so and I would then mentor them and work with them, and many times they came to see that the strength of their faith, and they were able to hold their own in the classroom. But I came to the realization that there are many other students who didn't come to my office who probably lost their faith. In fact,
Yeah.
interestingly enough, this particular professor, although there were several others I ran into the same story, they came from evangelical homes, and they had rejected everything in there as a student of that. When they were students, they
Wow.
rejected it all, and then became angry that they had been taught that, and therefore made their mission in life to lead as many others away from the faith. And it's quite rampant and of course, and now with the colleges and universities are housing more and more in the academic scene a Marxist point of view,
Mhm.
Marxist socialist point of view, which is inherently atheistic.
Yes.
And they preach it in the classroom. The classroom is not a benign place at all. It is clearly a place where a lot of propaganda and indoctrination is going on. And students that don't understand these systems, who don't understand what socialism and Marxism is, who don't really understand the arguments the atheists deliver. And by the way, the professor was affected because he knew the arguments they were going to give because he came from a evangelical home. So he knew those arguments, but he didn't know, but the students didn't know the counter arguments,
Mhm.
which are powerful and they're
Yeah.
based in scripture.
Yeah.
And I personally, and I've been on a bandwagon about this many times. I really feel that the church is letting down students because I believe that in the junior and senior years before they go off to college, if they do go off to college, and many of them do, but they can be found in the workplace as well. These same ideas are bandied about in every venue of our culture. But any case, when they get to that age, I think the church should have, and students really respond to this, have Q&A times where they have just where the pastor can, or the youth director, whomever it is leading the group, and sit down and in a roundtable discussion say, what do you think? What is in your mind socialism? What is Marxism? What
Yeah.
is wokeism? What is critical race theory? They don't know. They
Yeah.
heard it. They may have seen it on media, and the social media is where they get most of their information, which is mostly disinformation or
Yeah.
misinformation, either one. And so they have no idea. And for the church to be able to say, "Oh, this is what they're saying. This is what it means, and this is the Christian alternative," and so that they can understand what they're being told and what the Christian response is to that,
Yeah.
so that they're prepared. So when they go off to hear these things in the classroom, it's not new to them. It's not
Yeah.
foreign to them. They know what that point of view is, and they know how toxic it is, and they know the biblical alternative is to
Mhm.
it. But they have to have that kind of training, and it also is in the home. I think this starts in the home. I think it can
Yeah.
continue in the church and be reinforced by, in fact, and as I say, students at junior and senior level in high school really relish Q&A times. They
Mhm.
love the interaction and so forth. They don't want someone standing up there just lecturing them and giving another sermon. They already get that in church. They need that. They need in the individual sessions to have their own questions answered and their own inquiries fulfilled. But they don't, and so consequently they are, as I say, like sheep heading to the slaughter.
Yeah.
And I remember, by the way, this reminded me, several years ago, I was asked to speak at a church retreat, which I did, and I was happy to do that. At the end, or toward the end, they came to me and said, could you have tack on an extra session at the end for we have some parents in our church whose kids have lost the faith as a result of, by the second year of college, they had decided to bag it and gone a different direction, and they're heartbroken and they need some counsel. And so, would you be willing to do that? And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, I went into this room thinking that there'd be, maybe 8, 10 people. We'd sit around the table and talk about and a little Q&A kind of thing. Well, I walked in and I was shocked. The room was packed to
Oh.
capacity. All of these parents, probably 50 parents there, all of them had children, sons or daughters, sometimes both, had walked away from the faith and gone off to college and walked away from the faith. It was then I realized how pervasive this problem really is. I mean,
Wow.
I had experienced it as a professor at the college level, but I experienced just how pervasive it is from this church, and this is one church, and who knows how many other churches could have the same problem. And so I became very convinced. That's what motivated me to write this book, because I felt like there are many that are not prepared. And when I say it starting at home, parents need to ask their kids, especially their teenagers, but even earlier on, have times of asking questions of them and finding out where their belief is.
Mhm.
So many parents, if you interview them and you talk to them, uh, they don't really talk to their kids about it. They take them to church and they expect church to do that job, but they don't really sit down and say, "What do you think of this?" Or when the pastor said this, what was your reaction? They
Yeah.
don't do that. Or what you learned in Sunday school, for example, and what was taught there, and what did you have any questions about it?
Mhm.
And then to be able to begin talking, and a lot of parents don't do that for one reason. They themselves are not steeped enough in scripture to be able to teach it. And so they don't want to expose their ignorance, especially to our teenage children.
Yeah.
But one of the things that parents can do, and kids love this actually, that if they feel the freedom to be able to talk to their parents about any question that they have about their faith, that if the parent says, I don't know the answer to that question, but let me do some research on it and I'll get back to you. In other words, buying time. Kids love that because they know that they don't expect mom and dad to be the shell answer man, to be able to answer every biblical question,
Right.
but the willingness to go and research it yourself, to come back with an answer and talk about it, tells the teenager, "Your question is valid.
Mm,
You are valid. You are worth going to do the legwork to inform them about it." And so
yeah.
it's reinforcing and builds their self-esteem that they haven't asked a stupid question. And then they also love the authenticity of their parents. When they
Mhm.
say, "Gee, I don't know the answer to that, but let me get back to you. I'll study that." Or we can even study it together. But the point is that you're not dismissing it or giving a half answer. You're willing to go dig into it yourself, and you're admitting, "I don't know everything." And
Right.
parents sometimes are afraid to do that, like somehow that eats into their authority. It does not. In fact, it implements their authority
Mhm.
because to the teenager especially, they highly value authenticity. They
Yes.
hate more than anything else hypocrisy. And so to pretend something to overcome your lack of knowledge of something is a bad idea. It's better just to be honest about it, and then you explore it together. And when you do that, your kids really appreciate what you come back with, and they're ready to listen. But the bottom line is you're teaching them all along, and then that's reinforced if they have that kind of setup at church. That combination is powerful, so that when they walk off to college or the workplace or whatever, they are armed with their understanding of different points of view and what they mean and what the biblical answer is.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's so good. There's a couple of things that come out with all that in my mind that I want to kind of talk about real quick.
Uh-huh.
First of all, my husband at one point was talking to he was at a mosque and he was talking to a young Muslim man. He was probably like 19, maybe. Maybe he wasn't even 19. He was not in his early 20s yet. I mean, excuse me.
Uh-huh.
And, this young man was saying to him, I talk to my Christian friends about these things and, at school and stuff, and I ask them questions and they don't know answers. And so I can tell them their answers. He goes, you need to do better. You need to do better teaching your young people why they believe what they believe.
Uh-huh.
He says, you need to know, you need to do better. And I thought to myself, why is it that as Christians, we don't do better? I think a lot of the reason is because we are busy. We get busy. We get busy with sports. We get busy with all the things. We're running 50 miles an hour. If we put as much emphasis on discipling as our kids, and not that sports and activities and music lessons and all that stuff is great and it is important. I'm not diminishing it at all. However, that's not what's going to get your kids through those tough times.
Uh-huh.
That's not what's going to get your kids when they're sitting in a classroom being challenged in what they believe. And that's not going to get them through because they're a good basketball player, or they can play hockey, or they can play the piano beautifully and sing. That's not going to get them through. What's going to get them through is what you were talking about, those question and answer times, those times
Uh-huh.
of just getting into the word. Why we don't have classes that, and when I think about like Islam, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, um, uh, a lot Judaism, the Jewish faith, they have classes. These kids go to schools on the weekends to learn their religion and to understand. They're questioning each other. They're getting questioned like, okay, you're going to get asked this. What would you say about that? And if you don't have an answer, then when you come back next week, you better not only have an answer as to why you believe what you believe, but here's the references in the word of God, why you, or in whatever holy book they use
Uh-huh.
as to why you believe what you believe. And I look at that and I think, we don't do that with our kids. We just don't do that. And
No, we don't.
I
We
just
really
feel like
don't.
we're really cutting them short, in a lot of ways. Yeah. Anyways, I think that we need to pray about what are we getting involved in and what things does God want us to get involved in when it comes to our children. And sometimes we have to make an unpopular decision, but you're the parent, so you get to make those decisions. That's just the
Well,
way it is.
what I have found over time is that these students ask really great
They
questions.
want to know.
They want answers, and
Yeah.
they ask for, deep questions, and, if we think, "Well, they're not really listening, they don't think," that's just simply not
That's a
true.
lie.
and it does them a dishonor to not
Mhm.
have the time to ask them questions, to have them ask you questions, and to feel the freedom to do that. A lot of times, by the time they get to be teenagers, they've already learned not to ask their parents anything, or for fear that they might get blowback. So they don't ask anything, or they may fear that if they do ask the question, they'll appear to be foolish to their parents, and they don't want
Mhm.
that either. So it's important that you set the tone that all questions are welcome here, that
Mhm.
all open there's an openness of conversation, so that there's not a feeling like there are certain subjects we can't veer into. Everything is open and on the board. That's true even in terms of ethics, in terms of sexual behavior. They're going to
Yep.
run into all these kinds of things, and these things are discussed copiously on new social media. It's not like they're naive to them, and to
Right.
think that they are is a mistaken assumption. But I think that the more open you are with them, the more transparent you are with them, the more they are going to appreciate it, the more they're going to come to trust you, and they're going to trust what you have to say, and they're
Mhm.
going to listen to you. But if you come at it from a kind of dictatorial point of view, and by the way, this goes back to even I have the first chapter in the book is about how parents respond when their kids are moving away from Christianity.
That was my next question for you with your 2.
Pardon?
I said that was gonna be my next question for you because of your 2 children and your experience that you wrote about.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think some parents, because they're so afraid of losing their kids, they will placate them, meaning that they will try to show them that they're not rigid and they're not hopelessly conservative, and so that they will try to accommodate their views as much as
Mhm.
humanly possible. That's a mistake because for two reasons. Number one, the kid knows absolutely that you're faking it.
Yep.
You're pretending because you don't believe those things. They know you don't believe those things. And so
Mhm.
why would you kind of pretend to go along with it? And the second, so it strips you of your transparency and your
Mhm.
authenticity. And the second thing of placating them is that they don't appreciate, they know how long you practice your faith. They know you're not moving in a different direction. And so consequently, they just turn you off.
Yeah.
And, so placating doesn't do any good. Arguing, some of them argue it. And go, well, I'm going to set up and I'm going to be the antagonist here and I'm going to argue them out of their point of view and show them how dumb their point of view is or how dumb Marxism is
Mhm.
or whatever is being taught. Their wokeism and critical race theory, whatever, providing the parent even knows it himself.
Yep.
But they try to argue him out of it. That doesn't work either because they just get defensive
Yep.
and feel they're on the spot, and they will then just come back, and then all you end up is screaming matches that end up with hurt feelings and further distancing between you and your
Yeah.
child. And, but the third and in fact, some of them and the third ill-advised approach is some people take it really personally. When their children lose their faith, they take it as rejecting of them because they have that faith, and
Yes.
so then they take it personally, and then they say, "We're gonna cut you off. You're not
Ugh.
part of this family. If you're
No.
gonna believe that, then just don't come here." And I've seen families completely break up and not talk to each other for years. I had a
Wow.
student, though, it was very interesting. I had a student, came into my office. I didn't know him, he wasn't one of my students, but he knew of me and knew my Christian faith. So he came in, he sat down, and he said, "I'm a pastor's kid." He said, "I was raised in Kansas," and I was in Oregon. We were in Oregon. He said, "I was raised in Kansas. And my father was a pastor, and we lived in a glass bubble. Everything we did was scrutinized, and
Yeah.
I was given a lecture every Saturday night about how I was supposed to behave on Sunday so I don't embarrass him because he's the pastor. I got so sick of that pretense." He says, "I got so tired of it, I finally when I became a senior, I graduated from high school, I said, 'Goodbye, I'm out of here.'" And he says, "I never went back to my parents. I didn't even communicate to them." And he says, "That's been 8 years ago. They don't know whether I'm alive or dead. I have not talked to him in 8 years." But he said,
Wow.
"I have begun to discover how empty my life is, how meaningless it is in the kind of religiously intolerant attitudes of so many of his professors." And he said, "I began to realize that I'm lacking purpose." And so I have opened my Bible and I started reading and I said, I just need to talk about this. And so he came in, we just talked and opened up and shared about it. And in the end, he came in one day and he said, He says, "I'm not gonna be here, next week. I'm leaving. I'm going back to Kansas." And he says,
Wow.
he said, I called my parents, and they said they were just absolutely stunned that they didn't even know I was alive. And, believe me, I he said, "Believe me, I went through a lot. I've been through drugs, I've been through the whole 9 yards there. I'm fortunate to be alive." But he said, "I'm going back and making amends with my family and my God."
Oh,
And it was really a beautiful thing to behold. And he had really become full circle to his faith. But he had to come to a point of spiritual poverty that he realized that he didn't have the answers to anything and what he was hearing in the classroom no longer resonated with him. And
yeah.
so he came to this point of really beginning to question things and rethinking his own past. So sometimes kids will do that on their own, and he went back to overjoyed parents. But the point is that if you're trying to either placate them or argue with them or even worse, banish them because they don't believe you because you're taking it personally and feel like personal rejection. All those are very toxic responses by the parent. They're reacting out of their own fears and their own anger and their own disappointments. But you have to take a perspective that is is best for your teenager in the long run. And that is to ask them questions. Say, "Oh, what is it your professor said that was persuasive to you?" And then they'll share that and say, "Well, what made that persuasive to you? What was the evidence he gave for that?" And so when you start asking questions, just probing questions, it helps them to realize, I don't know. They really haven't shared a whole lot.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, I can't really explain their position that well. Well, then they begin to realize maybe I don't have it right, or maybe I need to rethink this.
Yeah.
But you're doing it all through a question and answer period, which is very inviting. You're respecting them.
Mhm.
You're listening to what they have to say. You're letting them have their day to talk about what they feel. And suddenly you got this passionate view about wokeism or something, and you're having them talk about it. You're not trying to argue with them,
Yeah.
but you're trying to get them to get to understand what they're saying. And when they try to explain why they're accepting something, suddenly they hear themselves talking and say, "That doesn't sound right. That
Mhm.
doesn't fit." And so they begin to question their own point of view, which is what you want to have happen. And that way you can have some back and forth and begin to talk about your faith, or he or she may even ask spontaneously questions that pertain to faith. So that's a far more effective way to deal with it than to be either confrontive or placating. Either way, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
It rarely works, and parents then walk away just more frustrated.
Yeah. I think too, when you do like what you talk about, asking questions, just letting them talk and listening to
Yes,
what they have to say, it gives them a chance to make the choice for themselves
yes,
that this isn't right. And now they're going to find it because it's not you saying to them, this is what you should believe, or no, we don't believe that.
right.
You were raised to believe this. It's more just like, well, tell me what's intriguing with that. What is it about that attracts you? I'm gonna
Uh-huh.
tell you that a lot of times the reason why socialism, Marxism, and those kinds of things and humanism are attractive to kids is because it comes across as compassionate and something that will reach out to people and like lift up the underdog kind of a thing is what they all it always seems to be that. The
There's a fault.
problem is that's not really what it is, but
You're
they don't
absolutely right.
know that.
It's a false humanitarianism.
Right. And
It's like, the anti-Semitic crowd who's talking about the Palestinians and their heartfelt desire to
mhm,
help Palestinians. Really, what they do is they hate the Jews, and
yeah.
but they cloak it in this humanitarian language,
They
and that's right.
misunderstand.
It's attracted to them.
Yeah, and then your student comes in with their heart of, like, seeing people who are hurting and wanting to be a good answer for that. What do we do about that? And then
Mhm.
they come in and for you to just ask them questions, "Well, so I hear that you have a heart for." It seems to me like you're struggling with how do we help people who are hurting? What are some
Right.
good ways to do that? Let's talk about that. And then maybe even pointing out, well, gosh, a socialist would say this. Would that be a good solution? Is that a long-term solution? Or what would be a better long-term solution? And just talking them through it and letting them kind of work it out on their own as parents. And you know what? You can leave a conversation without any resolution. It's
Yeah.
okay to do that and come back to it later too. I mean, I feel like for me, something I struggle with my adult children is I always wanna have the conversation come to a really nice little close because it just
Yeah.
makes me feel better as a mom that, "Okay, they got the point. We're closed off, now we can move on." But,
Mhm.
those open-ended conversations have come back to deeper and richer conversations and deeper and richer conversations. And ultimately, what I've learned to do is just leave it in the Lord's hands because,
Mhm.
we've raised them knowing the word of God. We've raised them understanding our Christian values. We've raised them with a good foundation. And God said he's not gonna let that come back to us void. Like
Mhm.
he has them in the palm of his hand. But it's important for us to learn. Like I love your whole ask questions thing because it makes it so that you're a safe place for kids to process.
Mhm.
And
And
they
you're
need that.
respecting him to do that because you're interested in you're genuinely
Yeah.
interested in what they believe and why they believe it, and they have to be able to give a reason why they believe what they're now believing.
Yeah.
And sometimes they end up with more questions than they do answers, which is a good thing, and that carries on the conversation so that
Mhm.
you can have a chance to reintroduce issues that are pertinent to their faith. But yes, you're absolutely right. One thing too, I might just add because I this is in the second chapter of the book, but I talk about the different types of students. One of the things I came to realize as a professor that not all students are the same in terms of their susceptibility to this indoctrination. Some are more persuaded than others. And so which ones are more vulnerable? And I came up with 6 different types of students who are particularly vulnerable. Parents can read that without going through all of it now because it would take too much time, but they can read that and say, does my teenager fit any of these 6 categories? Because if they do, they even have a heightened, endangerment when they go off to college because they are more vulnerable than most.
Yep.
And, so I think that that's an important thing as well. But I think in general, if we look at it from the point of view of familial relationships, that what we're talking about is strengthening familial relationships where
Yes.
there are too many families where the kids and the parents don't talk with each other. They come
Mhm.
and go in and out of the house. In a sense, they're kind of like social strangers to each other, even though they know and they've grown up in the same home and they've all been together, yet they don't really connect. They don't really they don't really talk about anything meaningful. And this by implementing this kind of approach, you are introducing something meaningful into your relationship with them. And they respond to that because frankly, there are not a lot of people who engage in them at that level. And even at the college level, when they get these things, they're getting it by indoctrination. They're not getting it by give and take. They're not asking questions. They're just drinking it in and
Mhm.
assuming that. And one of the problems, and I point out in the book, is the issue of admiration. They admire the professor. I mean, he's got all these degrees. He's got publications up the kazoo. He's well respected in his field and so forth. You come in right from the very beginning admiring, wow, this guy's got a lot to say. I'm really anxious to hear it. He's got a
Right.
national reputation. Wow. And so you drink in everything he says. And when he dips into metaphysical issues, which is not his expertise, they believe that just as much as they believe the mainline material that he is an expert in.
Mhm.
And they often will then veer off into their political views and into their sociological views and in their even in their spiritual views, and they will speak to them with the same kind of authority that they speak where they have real authority, which is in their subject field, and then blend it all together, and the student can't tell the difference, and they just accept it all wholesale.
Yep. Yeah. Well, my goodness, that time went fast. I wish I had another 45 minutes with you. Listen, to those of you who are listening, if you are like, "Boy, I wish I knew more what he was talking about." Well, good for you because we've got the book. We will be linking the book here in the description of this podcast. I urge you to get this one, you guys. I know we've had a lot of books on about this topic, but this one is really practical and it breaks it down. And this is coming from somebody who was a professor for more than 30 years, correct?
Right,
In a university college campus, not a Christian one, correct?
right.
Yeah. And so he, go
And
ahead.
I had the opportunity not only to teach I taught psychology
Hmm.
courses, but I also taught world religions, and I had an opportunity, this is rare, to teach a history of the Old Testament and history of the New Testament.
Wow.
And they told me I could teach it. The only thing I couldn't do is advocate it.
Yeah,
And I said, "I didn't care because the Bible advocates itself." So
exactly.
I had as many as 90 students taking classes in Old Testament and New Testament.
There's
So it
a
was really a
hunger.
privilege.
Isn't there? There's a hunger in our young people these days that just they just want you guys, they've seen so much fake. They've seen so much people just putting on a front and not and or saying that they're one thing but being another in the church, in the world, in so much of their life. They just want authenticity. They want somebody who says, "Gosh, that's a great question. I never thought of that question. Why don't we
Mhm.
talk about that? You go look up what you think and I'll look up what I think. We'll come back together. Let's go to coffee and talk about it because that's a great question." Things like
That's
that. And
exactly.
I really loved your book, Dr. Lovejoy, because what it really, like I said, it's practical, but it comes from somebody who has been on the college campus for more than 30 years and has seen where it started and how it's progressed. And I just want to encourage you guys. There's a lot of wisdom in this book. There's a lot of wisdom. It's Students in the Lion's Den. And again, the link will be in the description of this podcast. If you get any book on teaching your kids about their faith and really grounding them in the word, this is the one to get. It's really going to help you. It's practical, it's easy to read. There's a lot of great information in there. I just really appreciate it a lot. It was really good. It
And
challenged me. My kids are all grown up and they've gone through, but what's interesting is that our kids still come to us when they have questions about things like that. As adults, these are kids who have children of their own now, and they'll come to us and they'll be like, "Hey, mom, I heard about this on on the news the other day, and what do we think about that? What do you think about that?" And I'm like, "Well, why don't you tell me what you're thinking and where are you coming at that from?"
I
And it's
yeah.
interesting how we can have 3 kids with 3 in the same topic, have 3 different points of view, but they just, here's the other thing, they all love each other, they all care about each other, they all love the Lord, they all have a solid walk with Jesus, and it's just so cool to see how God just develops their walk with him.
And they come to you with questions, which
Yeah,
means that you cultivated that in the beginning, so they feel the freedom to do that now. And it's
yes,
a lifetime thing. I
it
mean,
is.
like you said, they're adults, but they're still coming to you and asking your views and things. So
Yeah,
it has lifetime effects for
yeah,
sure.
and man, let me tell you, we've messed up.
Well,
We've not
we
always
haven't
handled it
we all?
correctly, but they know that we love them. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lovejoy. I really appreciate it. And to my listeners, thank you so much for being with us today. If you have any questions, you can always contact us at info@mache.org. I'm so excited that you guys are with us today, and we'll see you next time.